Hi, I'm Steve Durgarbedian. Recently in Canadian Woodworking and Home Improvement magazine, I wrote an article on how to construct this Crenovian sawhorse. It was one of the first projects that we built at school, and that was so we could showcase our mortise and tenon joinery skills that we had just been taught. Now, if you've got 3 or 4 of these, they stack really well, they fit in the car, but I've always wanted to build a knockdown version of this. That way I can take it to my teaching locations and shows and set up a little table on top of 2 of them and lay my toolbox on top of that so it doesn't clutter up the workbench. There are a lot of ways of doing knockdown furniture. In the case of the sawhorse, I was thinking of doing through tenons and then using tusks to hold everything together. Now, one of the first power tools that I really gravitated to at school was the slot mortiser. It was a way of doing mortises in both pieces, such as a leg to apron joint in a table, and then making a floating tenon and joining everything together. Now, I always figured it was a little bit stronger because you were putting glue in both members. I tried to buy that same version that was at Rosewood Studio, but there was 2 problems with that. One was it was no longer in production, and the other one was, even if I could find a gently used one, it was going to take up a lot of floor space in my shop that I didn't quite have. For a while now, I've been using Festool's Domino, the smaller of the 2 versions. And when they came out with the connectors for it, I thought this would be a great opportunity to try a knockdown sawhorse with their connectors. So typically with the Domino, you're going to end up using various sizes of their beechwood tenons after you create the mortise with the machine. In our case, we're going with the connectors. When I first looked in the catalog, well, it got a little bit overwhelming. So you can buy these connectors in a sustainer like this, or get the components individually. My first concern was, with all these different pieces, what are the chances of my joint coming together perfectly without taking 15 tries at it? What I found in actual use is, as long as your layout lines are accurate between the 2 pieces to be joined, the machine and the jigs will take care of most of that. As an example, their drilling jig, along with their drill bit, will create a hole at the proper depth at the perfect position from the edge. Now, Festool calls these individual pieces connecting elements, not support elements. So I'm going to add some beechwood tenons to give it that extra bit of support. For this project, we're going to end up using 5 individual components. Festool calls this one of their corner joints. So after creating mortises, 1 in each part of the joint, we're going to take the set screw and thread it into the barrel. Next, using the drill jig as well as the drill bit, we'll create a properly positioned hole as well as the proper depth for this barrel to drop into. In order for it not to fall out when the individual components are all apart, we'll lock it in position with this plastic piece. Next, we're going to take the post as well as an anchor, and as we thread the post into it, it'll drive this wedge up into the body, spreading the wings and locking this into the mortise. Finally, we'll bring the 2 pieces together, and as we tighten the set screw, it'll bring the joint together nice and tight. So I've milled up some black walnut for the new knockdown sawhorses with some slight changes. The first is that the legs are now 1 inch thick. On the original, being 3/4 of an inch thick, I think it would have been okay, but I didn't want to have any issues when I bottomed out the anchor. The other consideration is we no longer need tenons on the bottom of the legs to the foot connection, as well as the 2 ends of the stretcher. Now, as far as connectors go, I'm going to place an anchor and a wooden tenon on each of the connections from the stretcher to the leg, as well as the leg to the foot. For the top, it's just going to be 1 anchor, and I think that'll be plenty. 4 of the joints on this knockdown sawhorse are going to be the same. I've found my centering mark and then created lines 3/4 of an inch out from that point. What this will do is allow me to center mortises to accept the wooden tenon as well as the Festool connector. Now, the mortises where the anchor goes in are going to be shallower than the other portion that accepts the barrel and plastic connector. I'll end up gluing the tenon, the wood tenon, into one of the components. That way I don't lose them when things are taken apart. So a couple of things of note, and that is when you're using the domino connectors, you want to switch to the 8mm cutter. The other thing to pay attention to is as you plunge into the piece, it's best to go as slow as you can so that the machine and the vacuum have time to extract the waste. So let's get started. For the mortises on the legs, I'm going to switch over to the 28mm setting, lock that in position, and now cut these mortises. Next, we're going to drill the hole that's going to accept the barrel part of the connector. In order to do that, we're going to use the drill jig that'll fit right into the mortise. We'll lower the clamp, tighten it in position, turn on the vacuum, Now it's time for a bit of assembly. I'm going to put the anchor in the foot, and using a slightly smaller domino, I'm going to tap it home. The next part is to put the barrel into the hole we created with the drill jig, and then insert the plastic piece to hold it in position. Again, I'm going to tap this home, and then drive the post into that anchor. Tightening the anchor pushes those wings out to grab the side of the mortise. Once that's done, we'll put the wooden tenon into the other mortise and see how it all fits. Tighten the set screw, and that'll lock that joint perfectly. After changing the setting back to the 15mm depth, it's now time to cut the mortises in the top. It's time to change back to the 28mm setting and finish the mortises at the top of the leg. Now it's back to the drilling jig and cutting those holes for the barrel. The 8 mm, 9 mm, 12 mm, 14 mm, 16 mm, 18 mm, 20 mm, 21 mm, 22 mm, 23 mm, 24 mm, 25 mm, 26 mm, 27 mm, 28 mm, 29 mm, 30 mm, 31 mm, 32 mm, 33 mm, 34 mm, 35 mm, 36 mm, 37 mm, 38 mm, 39 mm, 40 mm, 41 mm, 42 mm, 43 mm, 44 mm, 45 mm, 46 mm, 47 mm, 48 mm, 49 mm, 50 mm, 51 mm, 52 mm, 53 mm, 54 mm, 55 mm, 56 mm, 57 mm, 58 mm, 59 mm, 60 mm, 61 mm, 62 mm, 63 mm, 64 mm, 65 mm, 66 mm, 67 mm, 68 mm, 69 mm, 70 mm, 71 mm, 72 mm, 73 mm, 74 mm, 75 mm, 76 mm, 77 mm, 78 mm, 79 mm, 80 mm, 81 mm, 82 mm, 83 mm, 84 mm, 85 mm, 86 mm, 87 mm, 88 mm, 89 mm, 90 Again, it's time to insert the hardware. So the anchor goes into the top. We'll tap it home with the domino. If you notice on the post, there's a little bit of a divot. That's what the set screw engages. And on the top, we want it facing on the inside. So we'll use the hex key and tighten that down. Now we're going to insert the barrel into the hole. Insert the locking plastic piece. Tap that home. In fact, we'll use the small domino to drive it in all the way. So now let's see how it comes together. We'll tighten the set screw. Snug it up. That's a nice tight joint. I don't think it's going anywhere until we take it apart. In order to place the mortises in the leg for the stretcher in the center of the leg, we're going to change the configuration of the domino. So the first thing we're going to do is raise the height, and then we're going to go from 90 degrees to 0 degrees. Now, the distance from the center of the cutter to the base is 3/8 of an inch. It's actually the distance from here to the top of this. So now I'm clamped a straight edge, in this case the stretcher, 3/8 of an inch back from the center of the leg, and now we're going to use the domino in the vertical position. To cut the mortises on the ends of the stretcher, which is our last connection, we're going to switch the domino back to 90 degrees and lower it so that it's going to cut at the center of a 1-inch board. We'll also cut to the deeper depth at 28 millimeter and do our 4 plunges. Back at it with the drill jig for 2 more holes. So the anchors are going to go into the lower of the 2 holes, and we'll tap those in like we did before. The posts with the divots are going to face each other towards the inside. Going to make them nice and snug. That way they're seated in the mortises nice and tight. As far as the wooden dominoes, I like to take a little bit off the width, and that way they slip in and out of the mortises a little easier, especially on the knockdown version. Once more, the barrel drops into the hole, and we lock it in position with the plastic sleeve. And we'll drive it home with the smaller domino. Now, let's see how it all comes together. We'll start off with the leg to foot assembly and tighten the set screws for that. One of the things I really like about this connector system is as you tighten the set screws, it brings the joints together. It's almost like draw boring. Now that those are tight, we'll switch over to the stretcher. And tighten these set screws as well. And then last, we'll tie in the top and cinch it all together. I'm really impressed with how this connector system works and how strong the joints really are. I don't think there's going to be an issue of taking this apart and putting it back together lots of times.